Welkom bij De Nieuwe Wereld, verdiepende gesprekken in een tijd van verandering. Mijn naam is Ad Verbrugge en vandaag zijn bij mij te gast hoogleraar Sociologie uit Duitsland, Hans Joas. En voormalig hoogleraar Filosofie aan de, Centrum Ethos aan de Vrije Universiteit, Gabriel van der Brink. En we gaan het met elkaar hebben over het onlangs verschenen boek Waarom, Kerk, van de hand van Hans Joas. Het is weer december, dus tijd voor de eindejaarsactie van De Nieuwe Wereld. Alleen dankzij jullie zijn programma's zoals deze mogelijk. Dus steun ons. Word lid van Petje Af of doneer eenmalig. We zijn erop aangewezen.
Ja, en kijk, het buiten is het donker, maar bij ons is het altijd licht. De kaarsjes zijn aan, hier is warmte, filosofie, kennis en Ad.
Nou, en Marlies niet te vergeten. Welkom heren, very warm welcome. Let me first introduce Herr Joas. Herr Joas, wir hätten das Gespräch auch auf Deutsch führen können, aber wir machen es auf Englisch. Ja, we moeten het in het Engels doen. Ik denk dat dat het beste is voor de kijker. A very warm welcome,
Thank you.
Mr. Joas. Let me first ask this very simple question. Why this book on why church?
Mm-hmm. The book is called Why the Church because I'm rather opposed to the thinking that asks what exactly is the purpose of the church? What is the church good for? There is a constant tendency to ask this question in the sense of what can be the role of the church in the society? What can the state use the church for, or something like that? I'm opposed to that. And I'm asking, or you could say the opposite question, namely, there is an institution, and there has been an institution called the church for about 2,000 years now. And shouldn't we start our thinking about the church with the question how it comes that there is this very specific institution? I mean, it is specific in the sense that other major religious traditions have also had certain institutional outcomes, but not a church. So why has the church emerged in the Christian context? And why has it proved to be of such a long-lasting vitality that it is still around? And if you answer this question, I think you get beyond the simple polarizations within the church, and you also produce a new understanding among people who are not related to the Christian tradition at all, why there is an institution they may admire or they may find abominable, so to speak, but why is there this thing? That is the crucial question of the book, and that is why I chose this as title.
You're one of the, I think, the main figures also at the university reflecting on the so-called secularization thesis,
right?
In which we had the idea that modernization, in fact, implies a kind of a secular worldview in which the traditional religious outlooks on life become irrelevant in a way. Of course, we see nowadays that everywhere around the world, religion still becomes more important than it was 50 years ago. Some related to this process of modernization itself,
yes.
Like, for example, the famous sociologist Immanuel Castells, in which he speaks of the rise of fundamentalism. I think you might be rather critical on that issue, but we can discuss that later on. But I think when I ask you the question why church, it's also related to this process, of course, in which at least in Western societies are becoming more and more secularized in a way, and even the church is criticized from different people on different topics. So once more, writing this book in a kind of a secular Europe, I think you want to stress the importance, in a way, of this institutional, or ask the question of why the church.
Yeah, let's briefly begin with what you said, namely that for a rather long time, I would say, at least from the middle of the 19th century on, until the present, or until a time about 20 years ago, most intellectuals, most scholars in the humanities and the social sciences, but also the wider public, assumed that, as you said, modernization more or less necessarily leads to secularization. Now, both terms, modernization and secularization, are not absolutely clear. So I sometimes say the assumption has been that processes of economic growth as part of modernization and processes of scientific and technological progress somehow make religion superfluous. Now, there are different versions and so on, but I think it is fair to say it was a kind of consensus with very few exceptions. There are exceptions.
Especially in academia.
Yes, but also in the wider public, and sometimes even among religious believers. That sounds strange. But of course, for example, in the Catholic context, there have often been people who are opposed to modernization then, because they say if modernization leads to secularization, but I want to keep my faith, we have to do something against modernization. Now, I say that for interesting reasons, and one learns a lot from studying these reasons, the majority of, let's say, sociologists of religion, for example, in the last 20 years has given up defending this secularization thesis. Now, secularization thesis, to repeat that, means to make the claim that modernization leads to secularization. It does not mean every phenomenon of secularization is an indicator of something. You understand? I can easily admit, for example, living in Berlin, which is an extremely secular city and has been an extremely secular city for quite a long time. So I can easily admit the phenomena of secularization. I'm just asking, is the best explanation for that in the processes of modernization? And I've actually developed an alternative explanation for secularization processes. And we won't have the time to go into that, but I call it a political sociology of religion. Let's say, for example, that in the 19th century, in countries where, for example, the Catholic Church played a crucial role for national independence movements, in Poland, in Ireland, their religion, Catholic Christianity in this case, remained very vital. And this clearly has a political dimension in it. And on the other hand, sometimes countries that experienced a lot of secularization, that had a lot to do with disappointment about the political attitude of the church, for example. Okay. Now, this has changed for at least two scientific reasons and two developments, let's say, in real life. Scientific reasons. I just give you one example, a better understanding of the religious developments in the United States. Because the United States have always been the stumbling stone for the defenders or proponents of the secularization thesis. Nobody denies that the US is very modern in terms of technology, economy, and so on, but still the US in general remained much more religiously vital than most European countries. So how to explain that? And there have always been people who say, yeah, that's the exception from the rule and so on. And it has something to do. But what we have learned in the last few decades is that when rapid modernization processes take place outside Europe and North America, my favorite example is South Korea. This extremely rapid economic and technological modernization did not lead to secularization. Even the contrary is true. It led to a revitalization of the cultural religious traditions, let's say a revitalization of forms of Confucianism, but even to Christianization, a mostly Protestant Christianization in South Korea. So we have scientific reasons and other reasons, namely East Asian religious history, post-colonial religious history in Africa, where observers for a long time had assumed that when the colonial powers go, Christianity will disappear. But the opposite happened. Africa today, with regard to Christianity and Islam, sees a lot of conversion to these two religions and a real vitality of these two religious traditions. So things have changed. There are still a few defenders of the secularization thesis, but the majority of experts now are against the secularization thesis. This is not really the topic of this particular book, because it was the topic of earlier books. But now I ask the other question, not so much what can we expect, will religion remain vital and so on, but I ask this other question, do religious people really need institutions for their spirituality? Because I observe tendencies of people saying, no, I am not anti-religious or are-religious, or they say I am spiritual and so on. But I experience, for example, in the Catholic context, the clergy more as an obstacle for the development of my spirituality than the institution as a kind of enabling me in my spiritual development. So that's the crucial question. I say in this situation, where people remain religious or spiritual, whatever these terms mean in the individual case, but develop a kind of deep, profound skepticism with regard to the institution, we have to think anew why the institution is there at all. And so that was my...
Yes, exactly. And that's one of the reasons I asked the question, is that's the relevance of the institution in our current situation, especially in Europe, I think. This is a very fascinating question. Yeah. Why this church? Well, waarom Kerk? Gabriel, you reflected on this topic as well. I think in your work you're also having this discussion with Mr. Joas. What did you learn from his attitude, and how would you address exactly this topic of the importance of the institution, of the relevance, of the sense of this institution, given the current situation of religion in Europe?
Yes, of course, I would like to do that. But first of all, I have to say, I think that we agree to a large degree on this topic. I never have believed the secularization theory. I've studied modernization at large. No. But I agree with you that this is just a belief of sociologists from the 19th century and later on, just a belief. The facts are against it, but also conceptually it's rather simple. And now indeed we think differently. But there is an interesting question, also a historical question, and you say, well, the church exists now for 2,000 years. It needs an explanation, simply. It's not self-evident. No. And it's not self-evident for a certain reason, and that's what I would like to bring into the discussion. The church, at least the Catholics, is a very interesting, paradoxical phenomenon in a sense, because it's, on the one hand, it's not just an institution, but really a power institution. It is the successor of the Roman Empire in a certain sense. It has a hierarchy, it has its own law, etc. And it has its conflicts. It's a political body. And on the other hand, it has a message of love and of compassion, of morality. Now, in general, power and morality don't go together very easily. Many times in life you have to choose. Either you have your power and then moral is a problem, and you try to be a moral being and you have to stay away from power. But the church has succeeded in a way in balancing these two different powers of the human life. Not always in the same way, of course, having times where it succeeded, times of crisis. But in general, I would say that until now, the church tries to both be an institution and be a political body, in a sense, and to have this message of love and compassion, etc. Well, that's interesting. How is this possible? And well, to be honest, how is it possible? That question is not yet answered in your book.
No, but it's the main question of my book, and of course I've given answer to the question. Otherwise the book would be completely futile. So I don't understand how you can say I'm not answering the question. It may be you don't agree with my answer, but I give a very, very clear-cut answer to that question. Yes.
Just go.
I say, so we start with, let's say, what is the fundamental inspiration of Christianity? If we say the church is an institution very specific to the Christian religious tradition, we have to start with the specificities of the Christian religious tradition. Now I say it's not easy to characterize religions in, let's say, systematic intellectual terms, because the basic character of a religion is not, does not lie in an intellectual doctrine, but in narrations, symbolizations, exemplary figures, and such a thing. But I think most people will agree when I say one of the, let's say, three main elements of Christianity on the intellectual level is what is called moral universalism. Christians do not feel morally obliged only to those who are close to them. Let's say, who belong to the same family or to the same people, nation, and so on, but to all human beings. Christians are not only morally obliged toward other Christians, and that is not a matter, of course. In several religious traditions, you have a special obligation to the people you share the religious conviction with, but Christians are morally obliged to all human beings and even to the human beings of the future and so on, those who have not yet been born. Okay. Now, if this is true, you have a kind of deep sociological problem. Namely, religions who only have a kind of particularist moral orientation can be organized within a particular state, for example. So the religious institution can just be part of the institutions that are connected to family networks, clans, tribes, or to states, empires. Christians cannot. Now I say historically, there was even a point in the history of Christianity when Christians in the Roman Empire were so relieved that the persecution ended. It ended in the 4th century when first Emperor Constantine converted personally to Christianity, and then when the whole Roman Empire became Christianized. So it ended, and Christians were so relieved that they praised these emperors enormously. They developed a whole history of salvation, that God had always wanted the Romans to be victorious because he had already had the plan to Christianize the victorious empire later and so on. But then something happened at the end of the 4th century mostly and beginning of the following century, namely that one of the most important thinkers ever in the history of Christianity, namely Augustine, realized that this empire will probably not be forever.
Yeah.
And from that moment on, the question had to be posed, how can Christians, as moral universalists, be organized without the support of an empire. And this, I say, is the crucial idea behind the church. The church can no longer simply be an association of people who share a certain religious conviction, but then they become persecuted and so on. But it has to be a kind of global institution with an independence from every state on earth. And what you said about the, let's say, imperial features of the Catholic Church is of course correct, in the sense of this church has its center in exactly the town that was the capital of the Roman Empire. It took over titles that had originally been attributed to the emperor, Pontifex Maximus, to the Pope. And it imitates, to some extent, the structures of an empire, but in the spirit, you could almost say, of anti-imperialism. I mean, it's too strong a term, but you understand, of not being an empire. And this fit very well to the spirit of Jesus. You know that in the gospel, there's this story where the devil takes Jesus on a mountain and says, I show you all the empires in the world. You can rule over all of them. No ruler before had ever ruled about all the empires, so to speak. So he offers a kind of world domination. And Jesus, of course, refrains from accepting the offer and says, no. I mean, the devil makes it a condition that Jesus falls down to his knees, and Jesus says no. So this is what I call a kind of spiritualization of the idea of the empire, the kingdom of God, and not a worldwide empire is to come. That's how I see that. Of course, the future history is extremely complex, as you say, because this church always had to find arrangements with the existing political powers. And I will not go through 2,000 years of history of the church at this point. Just say, I think this is a clear-cut answer to the question, why did the church, in the sense in which we know it, emerge at all, and what does that mean for our orientation if we are not necessarily Christians, but moral universalists?
Yeah, clear. And that's what I find one of the fascinating thing in your work, and also in this book, that now you address this very important church father Augustine, with his idea of the two cities, of course. Yes. And then you make clear that in a way this fundamental idea of two cities was in a way historically necessary at the moment that the Roman Empire was in decline. You can say so. You have the Christians and Augustine had to really reflect on this idea of how can we in a way take care of Christianity in an institutional form. Not as a state, but in a different kind of organization. And I think on one of the passages in your essay, in the first essay, you say, well, I use the word cooperation, like it's the cooperation, cooperative
yes.
endeavor, you can say.
Yes.
And I think that's a fascinating point, because you said that you can say there's several decisive moments in Western history in which you can see this. You can say that this necessity of this split. It reminds me of the Hegelian thesis when he talks about the division between state and church, in which he says that the religious wars of the 17th century in fact made it necessary to develop a concept of state that was really separate from the church. That's one of his ideas. So you can say the Reformation, in a way, and the clash that became between, of course, the Reformists, the Protestant Church, and the Protestant religious people against the Catholic powers. Yeah, in a way, you can say prepared this rethinking of the position of the Catholic Church. Maybe you're not a Hegelian on this topic.
No, I'm certainly not a Hegelian.
No, but this division between state and church that we see in modern times.
Yes.
Because you can say in the Middle Ages, for example, in the 11th and 12th century, then there was even, you can say, a political tension or even a war between the worldly powers and the religious powers. The convestiture.
Investiture.
Yes. Yeah.
No, I've written extensively about that now in my new book, but it's a different book.
Yeah.
Not the one on the church, but I have now published a 1,000-page global history of moral universalism. And there the connection to what you just said about the Middle Ages is the following, that, let's say, in all the archaic and ancient empires, there was a clear centralization of power in the emperor, or whatever the title was. Now, through the emergence of the institution of a global church with its own universalist ambitions, you suddenly had, you could say, two poles of universalism. Now, this did not play a crucial role in late antiquity because the Roman Empire, at least its western half, lost its power. But in the Middle Ages, the new empire that emerged in the Middle Ages had these two poles that you had in mind, both claiming universality for themselves, the emperor and the pope.
Yeah.
But the whole, let's say, intellectual, political tradition had not developed a consensual view on who of the two poles should be the definitive authority in the last instance, so to speak. Is the pope higher than the emperor, or the emperor higher than the pope? In the first centuries, let's say Charlemagne and so on, it was clear that it was the emperor. But during the age of the church reform of the 11th and 12th centuries, the conflict escalated because there were popes who wanted to purify the church. And purify meant many things, but also to get rid of imperial domination or aristocratic domination in different territories, princely aristocratic domination over the church. And that led to an enormous conflict. So this is not the modern separation of church and state, but a kind of chaotic conflict. And even the crucial thinkers of the Middle Ages disagreed in this regard. In my book on the history of universalism, I take two of the most famous figures of all, Thomas Aquinas and Dante. And Thomas Aquinas, in this view, was a papalist, preferring the superiority of the Pope. And Dante was, I cannot say an imperialist, that would be totally misleading, but developed a very idealized conception of monarchy, and monarchy in the original sense meant monos, one ruler over the whole world, one deeply morally motivated ruler over the whole world, and in that sense supported the emperors against the popes. So that was the difficult balance or imbalance of moral universalism under medieval European conditions. Hegel is a totally different story, but let me just one.
I was talking about the religious wars in the 17th century, in which he says that is.
Yes. But Hegel was a kind of Orthodox Lutheran.
No, definitely.
And Lutheranism, of course, produced more closeness between state and church than in the medieval church and then in the Catholic Church. The Lutherans were willing, in their defensive situation against the church, to accept the support of the rulers, Luther's Reformation would not have survived without the support of the Saxonian Elector, for example, and of other princes who supported the Reformation, sometimes for religious reasons, but very often also because they hoped for more independence from the emperor by supporting the Reformation. So what you first have is more closeness. That's a different story in Calvinism, but in the Reformation that is crucial for Germany. I would say the Reformation first led to more closeness between the Reformed Church, the Lutheran Church, and political power.
We see the same in the United Kingdom, of course.
Yes,
That's
extreme
that's a clear example.
Yeah, because there the motivation
and
really came from
Scandinavia.
above. Yeah, Scandinavia, yes.
But maybe now we're witnessing once more, and the last age especially, this new the separation, the experience of this the separation. Now, I think one of the basic ideas, and you already addressed them also in this book, is that in the end, church the church is in fact a kind of an attempt to institutionalize very profound existential religious experience, which people are trying to somehow by cooperative endeavors to share, but also to make possible that somehow a tradition is formed. Gabriel, you're very also acquainted with the Catholic Church. We're living in an age in which almost all institutions at the moment are criticized. People are having huge problems with a lot of institutions, even the state itself, you could say, in the rise of populism. How do you understand this the core idea of the work of Hans Joas, in which this, you can say, this original existential experience is leading in the understanding of an institution like the church?
I think you are, in fact, asking two questions. Our two questions are hidden behind your question. On the one hand, we have the question of, let's say, hierarchy and human equal rights. In the modern society, we prefer to be to respect each other, and we don't have very much respect to powerful people because they have the power, but they are not right. Especially morally, we don't trust them. So in that sense, we are all oriented to a more democratic and a less autocratic way of organizing. Cooperation, yes. Respect, okay. Hierarchy, only if it is necessary. But that's one question. That's, let's say, a political question. There is another question that's more existential. How do we organize life in a social sense, let's say in a horizontal way? How does it, is it related to a more vertical orientation, to moral value, spirituality, God, etc.? So I think on an existential level, we are now looking for a cross, in a sense, of combining. How can you combine in today's life this horizontal orientation of democratic cooperation on the one hand, and staying a spiritual being and have an idea of transcendental ideas in this world, which doesn't like, at least empirically, idealist, moral beings, etc. It's quite a struggle, at least for me, and I think for many sensitive people. In which way, in which form, what kind of people can you survive this tension? How can you carry on while this vertical orientation, let's say spiritual orientation, is not very much easy to combine with social, political cooperation, etc. How do you?
No,
You address this question in your book,
yes.
and the idea of a synodal organization, for example.
Yes.
Maybe you can
Yes.
address this question.
So, two things. The first thing, I'm very grateful that you referred a few minutes ago to this attempt to use the notion of cooperative, for example, because it's probably not the ideal concept for what I try to articulate, but it comes out of a dilemma. I do not want to use a terminology that can be applied to the state, for example, to the church. That's why I'm also a little bit skeptical about democratizing the church. There are many pleas in the Catholic discussions for democratization of the church, but it is not a political body, and I'm all for democracy, so to speak, with regard to political bodies, but that does not mean that I transfer this concept to other types of institution. I'm also a little bit skeptical, for example, with regard to the slogan, let's democratize the university. Because
we agree on that point, all three.
Probably. Okay. So we need a different concept here. And some people use the term community, but that to me sounds too much as like being closely together in an almost private sense. That's why I mobilized a concept that plays an important role in the Germanic, I do not mean German, Germanic legal tradition, Genossenschaft. And that cannot easily be translated into English, except if you use a term like cooperative as the association, but the association has its own downsides as a concept and so on.
Brotherhood?
No, but brotherhood only in the universalist sense, if you... Brotherhood can sound like clan.
Genossenschaft has this institutional element.
Yes,
that's important.
Exactly.
And brotherhood is more.
Actually, I grew up in a Genossenschaft. So it comes to me. It is like kind of immediately plausible to me that there is a possibility also. And there was an important 19th century legal historian in Germany, Otto von Gierke, who wrote extremely important works on the historical development of this idea. And I mobilized that a little bit for my understanding of the church. But now, second remark, I'm a little bit afraid that what I've said so far could sound as if I idealize the existing church. And this is not what I want to do, because let's say the church, although I think it's good that it is global and attempts to be independent from all individual states, can also be structured like a state. Something you, I think, said before, a quasi-state with its own law and its own measures taken against priests who do not act in conformity with the official theological doctrine and all these things. And this, in the history of Christianity, has always also driven away people from the church. Not necessarily from the faith, but from the church. I mean the dynamics that lead to the formation of sects, for example, or the dynamics that lead to the formation of small mystical or spiritualist communities. So what I'm actually in favor of is not an exclusive focus on the church, but on the dynamics that lead from one type of the organization of Christians to another, biographically some people, and historically from one type of the organization of Christians to the other type of the organization, All sociologists are familiar with this typology, church, sect, spiritualist communities, but I don't want to use it merely as a typology, but as a kind of dynamic, why one is produced by the other, so to speak.
I found your distinction between the dialogical truth and the institutional truth very illuminating in this context.
Thank you.
Because you can say there's in a way Maybe you can first make this distinction clear for the viewer. Yeah,
Yes.
it's important.
Okay, so a last sentence on my second point was what I'm really in favor of. I mean, as a sociologist, is this dynamics.
Yeah.
And let's say as a church member, is in the idea of a synthesis of the different forms of organization Christianity has produced. The church as a global institution has to have within itself voluntary associations so that people do not become sectarians, and has to encourage a rich mystical or spiritual life so that people don't think they have to get out of the church in order to pursue their individual spiritual needs. Now, with regard to this understanding of the truth, for example, Pope Benedict the 16th, Josef Ratzinger, was an ardent...
Do you know him personally?
Yes, but only superficially.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Not as a colleague?
No.
Okay.
No. But he had a very strong understanding of truth and was very polemical in his attitude to, let's say, postmodernism and what he called the dictatorship of relativism. I found that always a little bit exaggerated because even if you disagree with postmodernist thinkers, they are not dictators. I mean, they don't have the power to be dictators, so to speak.
Luckily.
And yes. And relativism, only few people really defend relativism and so on. But that has something to do with what you asked. Namely, he had a very strong, I say, Platonic understanding of what the truth is. And that may lead to the view that the church somehow owns this truth. The truth has been revealed once and forever to the institution of the church, and the church owns that, hands it over transmitted from generation to generation. And this is a deeply, I would say, non-democratic understanding of truth. Because truth, in my view, and I'm very deeply influenced by the philosophy of American pragmatism, Charles Peirce, for example, is the result of rational argumentative discourse. I mean, you have to make the claim, I take this to be the truth. And then the ones you talk to are allowed to come up and say, I hear you, I understand you, but I disagree because you neglect the following empirical facts, or you made a mistake in your logical reasoning, and so on. And at the end, ideally, of such a debate, people come together in what they now share as truth.
And that's this distinction between this dialogical idea of
that's
truth.
The dialogical.
And so you can say the main task of a true institution is to keep you can say a certain openness towards this dialogue,
right?
And instead of
for example, let's say, how do we understand the Eucharist? It's different whether you think here is an official church doctrine, and this is the truth, and whoever does not accept that should, for example, not be allowed to take the Eucharist, and so on. Or whether you think this is such a gigantic phenomenon, so to speak, that we can experience a kind of fusion with the body of Christ by eating bread and drinking wine, that no human attempt to articulate it is fully adequate for what has to be articulated. And that makes you modest and less, in that sense, sectarian, for example. I could tell you, it may make sense to mention that there are Catholic, in Berlin, for example, there are Catholic priests who may say at the beginning of a religious service that, of course, Protestants are not allowed to go and take the Eucharist. It's only for those who really share the Catholic understanding of it. Since I have been married to a Protestant for 50 years, I know how she, for example, experiences as kind of scandalous. I mean, to be excluded. But I know Jesuits in Berlin who say everybody is welcome, who thinks that in whatever sense Jesus Christ is now present among us. How exactly is so difficult that probably none of us can really articulate it sufficiently. And I think this is a modest, as distinct from an authoritarian understanding of the deepest sides of the Christian faith. Yeah? And that's what I mean by let's attempt together to find an adequate articulation is different from let's be obedient to an institution that claims to own the truth once and forever. Yeah.
Yes, now you have mentioned the Jesuits.
Yeah.
It comes to my mind that you have neglected, in a sense, a very interesting organizing principle in the church, like creating orders.
No.
Okay, well, then I have forgotten it. But it's a way to within a certain institution to have room. Different. Okay, sorry, but the topic is more important than my memory. The topic is interesting because that's a way of organizing a debate, differences of perspectives within the same rule, and that is. I think I agree with you that this dialogue and with Ad, of course, that the open dialogue is basic. We could perhaps extend it a little bit. I've a few years ago read a book by Bernd Reuk. Perhaps you know him. No, you don't know.
Reuk, the historian of early modern age.
Well, a marvelous book about Europe and the Renaissance, etc. But he is claiming, and it's in that. For Europe, a long history of Europe, starting with Socrates and the dialogues, finding truth is only possible in this context by entering a dialogue. Nobody knows what the truth is. We have to find it. It's only for the time being there. And no authority can claim it. So it's not just an idea relevant for the church, it's relevant for Europe, for a certain way of handling conflicts, intellectual, moral conflicts. So I agree that it's important to have this dialogue, but has the church or has Christianity something to offer to Europe in this sense?
Okay.
To keeping this tradition alive.
Yes. So let me first say, I make the claim in the book that one has a simplistic understanding of the Catholic Church if one only sees the church hierarchy and does not see the orders. Not the, let's say, medieval orders or having their origin in late antiquity, the Benedictines, and then not the modern orders that came up, or some of them, like the Jesuits, came up under the challenge of the Reformation, so to speak. And so that means you do not have one unilinear hierarchy because there is a great independence of the orders from the local bishops, for example, and that interests me a lot. And it shows that the classical typology in sociology that goes back to Max Weber and Ernst Rölsch is the work of Protestants, I would say. I mean, Weber had some interest in the Jesuits, but he treated them as merely an instrument of the popes, which is not sufficient to understand the Jesuits, I think. So we need a richer typology and than this threefold typology. And there are even other phenomena. I mentioned the so-called denominations, that in the US they do not speak like in Germany, and I don't know about the Netherlands, about different confessions. I don't know what the word in
we also use the word denominations.
You should?
Yeah, we use the word denominations.
Interesting, because it came up in the US in the sense of a mutual respect of different forms of Christianity to each other. Not seeing the others as heretics, but as independent from us, but with an equal right to exist and to
And operating in the same market.
Yes. Okay.
In a way, we resemble, of course,
Yes.
the United States in that sense, that we have all those splits of churches.
Yes.
Now it is,
So now you are asking about Europe.
yeah.
I mean, the first thing I would like to say is what is for me crucial in the understanding of contemporary Christianity is the enormous globalization of Christianity that takes place under our eyes. That Christianity really is becoming, in that sense, a global religion. I said before that had always been the self-image of the Catholic Church, but its reality was very far from this self-image. My favorite illustration, but it's a very negative thing to say, is that when the First Vatican Council took place, 1869 and so, the colonies were represented in the council by bishops that all came from the colonizing powers.
Yeah, the West, the Europe.
Yeah. So it claimed to be a global event, but it was Europe talking to itself. And that was different already in the 1960s, when the bishops from colonies, or mostly then former colonies, came from the ethnicities, you could say, of the colonized countries, and I think that contributed to this atmosphere of the Second Vatican Council, that people became enthusiastic European bishops about the fact how global the church has become. And this has become stronger and stronger in the meantime. Now, the relevance for Europe of this fact is that Europe is confronted with a Christianity that is no longer part, or is less and less part of European civilization because of processes of Christianization, but extremely vital outside Europe. I constantly have the experience in discussions that, for example, in Germany, people think, Christianity is about to disappear, as we said at the beginning of the conversation.
And that's right for Europe, in a way.
Today, there are serious estimates that there are 23,000 new Christians in Africa every day, added to the number of Christians, through population growth, but also through conversion. That Christianity is in one of the most expansive phases of its history today, just not in Europe. And you can, of course, predict this will have major consequences for the institution of the church. Symbolized a little bit maybe in the first pope from Latin America, Pope Francis. Now in a pope from North America
and Latin America.
Yeah, exactly. And very important
Augustine.
To understand him, and probably very important for the motivation of the cardinals to elect him. That he has this balance, the ability to balance. Yeah, absolutely, I agree. And there will probably be a pope from Africa or
Asia,
South or East Asia in the near future. So we experience a fundamental change in the character of Christianity. And actually, I am happy about that, because I'm not such a defender of the particularly European and to some extent, let's say, bourgeois character that Christianity developed in the 19th and 20th century in Europe. So I think we are witnessing the emergence of a totally new form of Christianity with all sorts of repercussions for Christianity in Europe. I find this totally fascinating and a totally different picture than this everything is about to disappear and so on.
Thank you. We're reaching the end of our discussion, but I think it's important to mention that in your book you're not only talking about the church history but a lot of essays, or I think at least 3 of them, are really also dealing with this existential sense of religion. We didn't talk a lot about that, but I'd like to end with that because I think one of the main cultural characteristics, especially in the West, is this idea of self-optimation, in which the subjective feeling becomes dominant, and you address, I think, a certain experiences, for example, falling in love but also, of course, experiences of horror, of suffering, in which you say that we, in which the subject autonomy is in a way broken up, and it's important to, as a religious tradition, to give the language, but also the rituals in a way to deal with these kind of experiences. So maybe to end up with this idea, the why church, and in the end, it's about this, that these fundamental issues in human life, which has something to do with self-transcendence, that's one of the topics of your that we are losing. In modernity, or at least in the way modernity has developed itself in Europe, in a way we're losing touch with exactly this tradition and the importance of in a way institutional help or traditional ways of dealing with this condition humaine. This is not only humane, but points to our, say, a different source of being. Maybe you can add something to that.
Yes, maybe by referring to 2 concepts that you just used and that clearly appear in my book, namely self-optimization and self-transcendence. I think when we speak about self-optimization, we clearly speak about something where people, in that sense, stay close to themselves. They just want to mobilize things that go beyond them for their own purposes. You know, they have purposes in mind, but feel maybe too weak to pursue those goals, to achieve those ends, and hope that some philosophical tradition, let's say Stoicism, which is kind of fashionable in the US,
it's very popular also in the Netherlands, yes.
Or elements from Buddhism, from Indian spiritualist traditions, or from Christianity.
This funny remark on Jürgen Klinsmann.
And the Buddha
and the Buddhas, that's very funny.
In the training camp of Bayern Munich. And then saying, when some people say, how can you do that? And so on, this has nothing to do with religion. It's just for relaxation purposes. So that I say, imagine the crucifix with the corpus. And you say, this is just for relaxation. I mean, this wouldn't work.
He plays 4 Buddhas.
Yes, but it does injustice to the Buddhist religious
of course.
Too. So I make clear that, of course, I have nothing against people who try to gain strength or find consolation and so on. But self-optimization as such does not transform the self. And what I call experiences of self-transcendence is, let's say, at least in the first step, not a religious or a moral term, but the experience that something goes beyond the limitations of myself. That's why I often refer, and for example, when you teach students, they are in exactly the right age for that, the phenomenon of falling in love. That when you fall in love, you don't see the other as helpful for your pre-given purposes, but as an experience that attracts you so much that you may take the beloved one to be more important for you than you yourself are. So to speak, you are, And so in earlier books, I tried to develop a kind of what I call rich phenomenology of such experiences. Experiences of fusion with nature, for example, where you also have the feeling, now I am in a deep forest or on the top of a mountain, and I live in a kind of harmony for a moment with the whole cosmos and such things, or an ideal dialogue, where you really feel well understood by the other, and the other feels well understood by me, so to speak. That connects us. These are experiences of self-transcendence.
Moments of heaven on earth.
Yeah, yes. And this, I think, at first is a very, let's say, innocent, descriptive category to which all human beings have access, but without which you cannot understand what the phenomena of religion are about. Because the phenomena of religion are not mostly about intellectual convictions, doctrines, like studying scientific, scholarly works or even philosophy, and are not mostly about the institutions like the church, but about these dynamics. But when these dynamics, for example, lead you to accept certain moral doctrines, accept the role model of the Good Samaritan or of Jesus Christ, then this does not remain purely, let's say, a psychological phenomenon in you, but motivates you to become active, to change your life, to do things you would not have otherwise done, and to follow the model of the saints or of Jesus or whatever, in different, I don't want to restrict that to the Christian religious traditions, and you are not simply more moral then, because that, as William James said, that could sound as if it is a kind of athletic training to suppress your anti-moral inclinations. No, it fills a certain ideal with passion. You are really willing to help others, so to speak, because you want to be a person who is faithful to others and willing to assist others, not because you say, otherwise I will be punished by God after death, because it is the good thing that motivates you. That is what I try to grasp, so to speak. This phenomenon.
I can see that we're not in a hurry, so I have a little more time. That's great, because Gabriel, you published a book also on the. You said the higher sentiments.
And moral sentiments.
It's not the moral sentiments.
But that's the title of the book.
That's the title of the book. But maybe you can add something to this line of thought.
The moral sense is an allusion to Adam Smith, of course.
Yes, of course.
And there's nothing wrong with morality and moral sense. And sentiments are much more important than intellectual ideas in daily life. We agree. Yes. But now we are talking about something more than just moral sentiment. That's true. So I would, let's say, in a sense, the moral the moral order is the basis of our of social life, of human life. But something is more added to it in the spiritual sense. And what is this more? And it has to do with ecstasy, with being open to something strange, something powerful, something fascinating, and also horrifying. The definition of Rudolf Otto. Well, and in our societies, this experience it is there, but it is not articulate, it's not cultivated, it's not trained, it's not recognized. We don't have the language for it. And one of the more important things I think about your work, and I've tried to do something, is to find again a language or concepts of ideas or ways of thinking that we can recognize the importance of these experiences, and to bring them, at least for my part, also into the public debate, saying to people, it's not just private. It's not just an aesthetic or a sentimental or subjective feeling. It's something important for our society, for our openness, for our culture. And it's very difficult, at least in my experience, it's very difficult to get the right attention to this set of ideas. And I would like to know from you, how was your experience in, well, you're also trying to ask attention to it. What kind of people with parts of the public are responding, are resonating to this? What's your experience on this point?
My experience in general, I would say, is extremely positive.
Okay.
In the sense of, but I would say, of course, that the whole structure of this approach is an attempt to get beyond the limitations of, let's say, church-related people or religious people by really starting with fundamental structures of human experience that are familiar to people who don't define themselves as religious in any sense. I could repeat when I said, I mean, falling in love is something that not only religious people know.
Or dying.
Dying,
also
yes, or the fear of dying, the
yes.
anxiety connected to the perspective of
And how to handle it.
finitude and all that. Exactly. So I would, I mean, the main reason for emphasizing so strongly that we should not begin our understanding of religion on the level of intellectual doctrines or institutions, but on experiences. And then note, I'm not saying on religious experiences. Yeah? This is often a misunderstanding. And I have colleagues, for example, very well-known sociologists, who have told me, I cannot read your stuff about these things because you have access to a special type of experience to which I do not have access. I say, well, you're wrong. If you share a dialogue with me, so to speak, if you're willing to listen to me, I'll show you that you have access to these experiences. It's not that I have some immediate access to God they do not have or anything like that, because I try to construct that gradually from such elementary phenomena. Then, for example, of course, to the articulation of those experiences. Of course, you can have this feeling on the top of a mountain and so on. A Christian like me might say, in this situation, God, I thank you for the beauty of your creation. A non-believer will not say that, but still the non-believer knows what motivates me to say that, so to speak. Yeah? So one can slowly develop an understanding, at least, of what religious people mean when they say certain things. Yeah? And this enlarges the sphere of dialogue between believers or not. And the difficult point is, I would say, the last one, namely the sacraments, and what I said before about the Eucharist, for example, because there a certain understanding predates the experience. You know, if you don't think the bread is the body of Christ, eating bread is not a spiritual experience. So you have to have an understanding that only allows you then to have a non-everyday, an extraordinary experience in the situation of the Eucharist. I call those experiences sacramental experiences, but I ask non-religious people to understand that, because even in other experiences that have nothing to do with religion, certain descriptions play a role in the process of experience. You know, you can imagine a culture, there are cultures where there is no notion for falling in love. Because marriage is established through certain principles of the...
The concept doesn't exist.
The concept, but the experience exists. But it is, for example, described as being bewitched by somebody who is not allowed to become my sexual partner. But I feel a deep attraction. So we have, in specific cultures, let's say romantic, but not only romantic, categories for the articulation of a specific experience that is anthropologically universal.
And now we're back to Hegel, because you're saying now that the concept, in a sense, precedes the experience.
In some cases, I'm saying. I'm not saying
No,
always and whenever.
No,
I'm
it
saying-
might be more
yes.
general. True.
Yeah, of course. No, but not in the sense of. I'm saying that.
Not as a theory.
No, without the concept, you can't have that experience.
Yeah, but that is what I'm saying is the sequence of experience and articulation of experience and mobilization of cultural patterns for the articulation of experience is not a chronological sequence as if in the first years of your life you only have experiences, then come certain years in which you articulate them.
Sure.
There is a feedback. Yeah? You expect certain, I mean, if you grow up with the concept of falling in love, sometime in adolescence, you expect to fall in love. And you may later reinterpret that experience. It was not really falling in love. I just thought it is falling in love because I only learned later what real falling in love means.
You can say there's a kind of an intentional openness.
Yes,
That makes it the possibility more possible to happen.
Yes.
There's, I think the importance, and that's in a way a heuristic principle I follow as well, that you try to address experiences that can be recognized also by all people to make clear the different dimensions that are hiding in that experience. For example, this overwhelming experience of nature. A lot of people can recognize this experience. But when they, and maybe even in this experience of that they're overwhelmed, there might be this strange feeling of gratitude or something like that, and that's where in this gratitude, it's not really a concept. It's like it's an experience that comes from within, that makes clear, or that can be addressed also in a religious language by people who are religious. But it's maybe one final thought or theme that we can go into at the end of this our conversation. You're not talking a lot about Jesus in this book. So I was really wondering the idea of the sacrifice, for example. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on this fundamental Christian idea, of course.
Absolutely. I mean, on the one hand, I think I talk about Jesus and the crucifixion in this chapter. Do we need?
Yes.
And emphasize very much a fact that may sound paradoxical, at least to non-believers, that Christians find consolation in the desperation of Christ on the cross.
You mentioned those last words on the cross.
And I find this really interesting, whether you are a believer or not. You could say, I mean, the naive assumption would be that if Christ, in front of the cross, so to speak, had decided to kill the Roman soldiers or whatever, and to get out of the situation in full strength, that could be a consolation for the followers of Jesus, because it means whenever something happens, I have just asked Jesus to mobilize his superhuman powers and we will be victorious. But the Christian message is the opposite.
Sol invictus, in a way.
That would be the Roman version, so to speak, but it's exactly not the basic intuition of Christianity, namely God himself being so weak, and not only weak in the sense does not use violence against his persecutors or something, but so weak that he even gets desperate. And and why is this a consolation for human beings? Because we believe in a God that understands our deepest fears, even the fear of dying, but even the fear of being left alone by God, so to speak, of not being in any close relationship. And this paradoxically produces a specific understanding of the divinity.
The doubt about God himself.
But this not as an intellectual doubt again, but as a kind of existential depression and so on.
Exactly.
Now the miracle is that this is recognized by many people, even in non-believers, because we have the tradition here in Holland of the Matthäus Passion. It's very, very popular among the whole population, even pop versions. And that's exactly there you experience that's the experience, that relational experience of despair, and that's consolation. And on an intuitive level, everybody knows it.
But it's the ultimate expression of God becoming human.
But in general, I mean, Jesus comes into the history of moral universalism, so to speak, not in this book, but in the universalism book, in the following way. We first have to understand the role of the prophets, of what Weber called the ethical prophets. I mean, the Old Testament, Old Testament is a Christian expression. You understand the Hebrew prophets, namely that at least in a kind of literary genre, we do not really know whether those people after whom the prophetic books are named actually existed or whether they are the authors and so on, but that there is some imaginary of people claiming against political power what the true meaning of the religious and ethical doctrine is. I mean, the prophets say, you act like that, the ruler or the people, and God has sent me to tell you that this is wrong, that you have to change your mind and so on. So that's the prophet. And the prophets are not only a Hebrew or ancient Jew, so the role of Buddha, for example, and so a different type of prophet. In my book, I cover, let's say, this until Gandhi, who also became an exemplary prophet. Now, the idea of the prophet in the history of ancient Judaism led to this announcement of a Messiah. That's not just a prophet, but the prophets say in the future somebody will come who is more than I, who is just a prophet. But the first vision of the Messiah is one in terms of worldly power also. The Messiah will save our people against the aggression of imperial powers and so on. And Jesus turns the idea of the Messiah away from mundane political power into what I called in some other connection in our conversation a spiritualized conception of the empire. So Jesus...
And then we're back to the beginning of this conversation.
Exactly. Namely, do not think that there should be a complete fusion of mundane political power with the highest form of spirituality and morality, but be courageous and position yourself with regard to all political power in the spirit of moral universalism. This gives you some independence from all political domination, if you have the courage, and also incidentally from Europe. I'm presently, and I know that this is not very popular, but I'm not identifying Europe with Christianity. And that makes me happy about these two popes, because I really think both understood that. Francis became, there were extremely negative political commentary about Pope Francis, because he did not clearly identify with Ukraine or Israel. But in both cases, tried to balance between Ukraine and Russia, was called Putin's Pope, in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, or between Israel and the Palestinians. And there, the same newspaper commentator in Germany, very influential commentator in the leading newspaper, wrote, "This continues the tradition of anti-Judaism in the Catholic Church," and I very much disagreed, I must say. I mean,
That might be a German one-sidedness.
yeah, exactly. Yes, no, I think you are right. Yeah,
We see
because for me, it's kind of obvious that there is a suffering of the Palestinians, and that the Pope cannot say that doesn't bother me. Yeah, and so I have hope that Leo, in this sense, continues two things that, from my understanding of the Catholic Church, are absolutely crucial, and I think there are clear indications that Leo sees it like that too, namely the preferential option for the poor and the preferential option for peace, to which mostly Francis now has added also the option for the environment.
But he will have to fight as a lion.
Yeah, yes, of course.
Well,
But Leo has a totally different style than Francis, less, let's say, erratic, and very modest, very cautious. But okay, it's too early to judge Leo's papacy because it's just a few months. But I'm at the moment, okay, maybe I shouldn't say that, but I'm quite optimistic at the moment.
In a way, as you describe it, you can say that the different layers of experience and even the hierarchy between those experiences, because you can, just to remember Kierkegaard's distinction between the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious, is in a way reflected in this political realm. That you can say that in the end the church is taking care of the religious. So that's not the same as the ethical. It's not the same as the aesthetic, of course. So this means that we started our conversation on this topic of the two cities, and in a way this distinction resembles this division between these layers of experience and even this hierarchy in a way. At the same time, and that's the last question I put forward. At the same time, you speak of moral universalism, and that's of course the question is, how does this religious experience relate to morality? And maybe you can say some last words on that.
So I use the term moral universalism. That I have not invented it.
No.
I use an existing term that, for example, plays an important role in the work of perhaps the most prominent American Protestant theologian of the 20th century, Reinhold Niebuhr. Also today in the writings of Jürgen Habermas, for example. Actually, I would be interested in a kind of history of the concept of moral universalism, which I cannot offer you. So I have not tried to find out.
I think Kant is, of course, a very important.
But I don't think he speaks. Of course, he's a main incarnation of the spirit of moral universalism. But I do not think he uses the term moral universalism anywhere. So who used it first and so on, that would be a question. I would be interested in reading something about, not really spending my time to do the conceptual history.
But you don't reduce a religion to morality.
Not at all.
Yeah, that's important.
And of course, moral universalism, let's say I have Habermas, for example, in mind also. And I would like to say things. He's clearly non-religious. Some people misunderstand his, let's say, interest in religion in the last 2 decades. He makes it very clear, I saw him last week, that this is not his own conviction or whatever, or orientation, but he's very clearly a moral universalist. So, of course, the notion of moral universalism is an attempt also to form a coalition of all forms of religious moral universalism, let's say Buddhist and Muslim and Jewish, to the extent that there are moral universalists, with secular universalists, whether they are Kantians, Rawlsians, Habermasians, or whatever. So I need a term that does not exclude non-religious people, because I'm interested in a coalition
Now I understand.
of religious and non-religious people. But it's very important for me not to misunderstand morality as, okay, now in my more technical language, as merely restrictive. You know, morality can mean certain things are not allowed. Whereas my interest, that's true, it has to be the case. I'm not against moral and legal regulations, but that what truly interests me, so to speak, is, Kierkegaard would have said, the passion, the passionate dimension, why you don't feel to be forced to do this, but why you are deeply enthusiastic about an ideal. That motivates you. We touched on that point before in our conversation.
And that's enthusiasm and theos. So like the spirit, be spiritually touched.
Yes, and yes, because we all know that our, let's say, deepest motivations are also gifts. And that's why I think you were very right when you mentioned feelings of gratitude, as in processes of creativity.
Exactly.
Basic ideas come to you. I mean, you had been searching for the idea, but maybe there was a moment when you were not immediately searching it, that it came to you as a kind of revelation.
And the Greeks were saying they were visited by the muses.
Yes, and inspire is also the word that the spirit comes into you. And this feeling of passivity and gift and so on, receptiveness, that's also true for our basic ideals, I would say. That I have the feeling this is so obvious to me, it's self-evident to me, but it doesn't seem to be self-evident to others. But for me, it's the deepest motivation. And this experience is true not only for religious people again. I mean, I know people who say, let's say, protecting Germany from anything like the Holocaust to happen again. That is my deepest motivation. They may not be religious, but they have a clear, let's say, negative experience in view and sacrifice their lives, you could say, for preventing the repetition of such a historical catastrophe. Okay.
Professor Joas, I would like to thank you very much for this profound conversation. Ik wil de kijkers nog even attenderen op dit mooie boek Waarom, Kerk. En met verschillende essays die vanuit verschillende aspecten van het religieuze leven en de kerk zelf belichten. Dus misschien een mooi boek voor kerst of het einde van het jaar. Thank you very much.